What happens when entitlement and prejudice collide at 30,000 feet on a sold-out flight from New York to Geneva? A successful black CEO, Jameson Blackwood, finds his first-class seat 1A, occupied by a woman who refuses to move. She scoffs at his boarding pass, whispers insults to the crew, and declares that he is the one who doesn't belong. But her petty power play is about to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. This isn't just a story about a stolen seat. It's about a single, arrogant act that triggers a federal security response grounds, an entire international flight, and unleashes a tidal wave of karma so devastating it destroys an entire corporate legacy. Stay with us as we unfold the story of how one woman's prejudice didn't just cost her a flight, it cost her everything. The Polaris Lounge at Newark Liberty International was an oasis of curated calm amidst the swirling chaos of a transatlantic hub. For Jameson Blackwood, it was a sanctuary, a liminal space between the crushing demands of his New York headquarters and the high-stakes negotiations awaiting him in Geneva. At 42, he was the founder and CEO of Etheria Dynamics, a company that had single-handedly revolutionized the renewable energy storage market. He wore his success not like a suit of armor, but like a well-tailored cashmere coat with quiet confidence and understated elegance. Dressed in dark gray trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a tailored navy blazer, he looked less like a tech titan and more like a tenured professor of philosophy. He sat in a secluded corner, a glass of water and a tablet, his only companions. On the screen were the final schematics for the Helios Array, a project that promised to make solar energy storage affordable for developing nations. It was his life's work, the culmination of a dream that began in a dusty garage in Detroit. This trip to Geneva was pivotal. He was set to deliver the keynote address at the World Economic Forum and finalize a quiet back-channel acquisition of a European manufacturing giant Stellaron Corp, a move that would secure Etheria's global supply chain for the next decade. The boarding call for United Flight 972 to Geneva echoed softly through the lounge. Jameson closed his tablet, slipped it into his sleek leather briefcase, and took a final centering breath. He was a man who lived by schedules, by data, by the predictable physics of energy and finance. The airport, with its potential for random delays and human error, was one of the few variables he couldn't entirely control, which was why he always opted for seat 1A. It offered maximum privacy, the first to board, the first to deplane. It was a small bastion of order in a world of potential chaos. He walked down the jet bridge, the scent of jet fuel and recycled air filling his nostrils. He gave a polite nod to the flight attendants at the door and turned left into the exclusive first-class cabin. The pod-like seats were angled for privacy, bathed in the soft blue mood lighting of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner. He approached the front row, his eyes set on 1A, and stopped. A woman was in his seat. She was perhaps in her late 50s, with meticulously coiffed blonde hair that looked as rigid as her posture. She was dressed in a cream-colored St. John knit suit, a string of pearls tight around her neck. Her face, etched with lines of faint disapproval, was pointedly turned toward the window her phone held up, as if she were capturing a photo of the ground crew. Her purse, a Louis Vuitton never-full, sat possessively on the small table of the adjacent empty seat, 1B. Jameson paused, double-checking his boarding pass. Blackwood J. Seat 1A. There was no mistake. He cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and even. The woman didn't turn. She gave a slight, dismissive wave of her hand, as if shooing away a fly. "Excuse me," Jameson repeated, a little more firmly this time. I believe you're in my seat." This time she turned her head slowly, her eyes the color of pale blue ice raking over him from his polished Oxfords to his neatly trimmed hair. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, not just annoyance, but a deep ingrained appraisal, a judgment being rendered in a fraction of a second. "I'm quite sure you're mistaken," she said, her voice dripping with a kind of honeyed condescension common to the old money enclaves of the Upper East Side. "This is my seat. I always sit in 1A. "I understand," Jameson said, maintaining his placid demeanor. "But my boarding pass says 1A. Perhaps there's been a mix-up with the gate agent." He held out his pass for her to see. She didn't even glance at it. Instead, a small, patronizing smile touched her lips. "Oh, I'm sure it says that. The scanners can be so finicky. But I have been flying this route for 20 years. The airline knows me. This is my seat." She turned back to the window, the conversation in her mind unequivocally over. Jameson stood in the narrow aisle, a silent pillar of patience. Other first-class passengers were beginning to board their carry-ons, clicking against the sides of the cabin. They shuffled past, casting curious glances. He could feel the familiar weight of this moment, an interaction he had navigated 100 times in 100 different boardrooms, country clubs, and restaurants. It was the quiet, confident assertion of privilege, the unspoken assumption that he, a black man, must be the one in error. A young flight attendant named Maria, her name badge, gleaming under the cabin lights, hurried over. "Is there a problem here, sir?" she asked, her tone bright but nervous. "Yes," Jameson said simply. "This passenger is in my assigned seat, 1A. He showed Maria his pass. Maria looked at the pass, then at the woman. Her professional smile faltered. She clearly recognized the type, the frequent flyer, with a diamond-studded status who could make or break her performance review with a single complaint letter. "Ma'am," Maria said, her voice now tentative, "could I please see your boarding pass?" The woman sighed, a theatrical display of exasperation. "This is ridiculous," she huffed, finally rummaging through her oversized purse. She produced a ticket, not a digital pass on a phone, but an old-fashioned paper one. She thrust it at Maria. "Here, you'll see I'm exactly where I belong." Maria's eyes scanned the paper. Her face fell. She looked up first at the woman, then at Jameson, her expression a cocktail of apology and helplessness. "Ma'am," she whispered, leaning closer to the woman. "I'm so sorry, but your assigned seat is 4F. The woman snatched the ticket back. "That's impossible. It's a mistake. My assistant Eleanor booked this. She knows I only fly in the bulkhead. Run it again." "Ma'am, the system is showing Mr. Blackwood here in 1A. Seat 4F is a lovely window seat as well. I'm not moving to the 4th row." The woman snapped her voice, no longer honeyed but sharp as broken glass. She finally looked directly at Jameson, her disdain now naked and undisguised. "Why don't you go find your actual seat?" "I'm sure it's very nice. In the back." The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It was no longer about a seat. It was a clear racial demarcation line drawn in the plush carpet of the first-class cabin. Jameson's jaw tightened, but his expression remained a mask of impenetrable calm. He knew that any display of anger would only validate her prejudice in the eyes of others. He would not give her that satisfaction. "I have no intention of moving from the seat I paid for." He stated, his voice low and resonant, carrying a new edge of steel. "And I expect the airline staff to resolve this." He looked at Maria, whose face had gone pale. The young flight attendant was completely out of her depth. caught between an immovable object of entitlement and an immovable object of principle. The quiet hum of the aircraft seemed to grow louder, the blue mood lighting suddenly feeling cold and interrogative. The storm had arrived. The standoff in row 1 had created a bottleneck. Passengers in the business and premium economy cabins, craning their necks to see the source of the delay, began to grumble. The atmosphere in the front cabin, once serene, was now crackling with tension. Every eye was on Jameson Blackwood, the woman in his seat and the floundering flight attendant. Let's call the woman Carolyn Fletcher. It was a name that suited her classic a little severe, and belonging to a world where rules were for other people. Carolyn, having delivered her venomous line, settled back into the seat as if to physically fuse with it. She crossed her arms, a defiant queen on a stolen throne. She was banking on the power of her appearance, her age, her race, and her perceived social standing to win the day. In her experience, it always had. Jameson, however, did not engage with her further. To argue with her would be to legitimize her premise. Instead, he directed his unwavering attention to Maria. "I need you to get your purser," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "This situation requires a supervisor." Maria, grateful for a clear directive, nodded quickly and practically fled towards the galley. Jameson stepped aside, allowing a few more passengers to shuffle past. One of them, a man in a rumpled suit, gave him a sympathetic look. Another avoided eye contact altogether, pretending to be intensely interested in the overhead bin mechanism. Silence. Jameson knew was often a form of complicity. A few moments later, a man with a calm, authoritative air emerged from the galley. He was the purser, David Chen. He was older than Maria, with flecks of grey at his temples, and the weary but patient eyes of a man who had seen everything the flying public had to offer. "Good morning, sir, ma'am. I'm David, the purser for this flight. I understand there's some confusion about the seating." He said, his voice a model of professional neutrality. "There is no confusion," Carolyn Fletcher interjected before Jameson could speak. "This man is insisting my seat is his. I was here first. I have been a Global Services member for 15 years. I spend more on this airline annually than he probably earns in a year." She gestured vaguely at Jameson's elegant but understated attire, a clear insinuation that he couldn't possibly afford the seat. David Chen's expression didn't flicker. He had heard it all before. "I understand, ma'am. May I please see both of your boarding passes?" Jameson presented his phone with the digital pass. David scanned it with a handheld device. A green light beeped. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. You are confirmed for 1A. He then turned to Crawlin. "Ma'am, your pass, please." With an aggravated sigh, she handed him the paper ticket again. David looked at it, then at his device. "Ma'am, your assigned seat is indeed 4F. It seems there was a last-minute equipment change from a 707 to this 787, and some seat assignments were shifted. I do apologize for the inconvenience, but seat 1A is assigned to Mr. Blackwood." He had given her a perfectly logical face-saving explanation. It was a corporate error, not her mistake. All she had to do was accept it and move. She did not. "An equipment change," she scoffed. "How convenient. It's more likely that your system has been upgraded by some diversity initiative to give preferential treatment." She looked pointedly at Jameson. "I will not be moved for the sake of your corporate wokeness." The word wokeness was deployed like a weapon designed to frame her prejudice as a principled political stand. David Chen's professional mask finally slipped, just for a second. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Ma'am," he said, his voice losing its warmth and taking on a formal, clipped tone. "This has nothing to do with politics. It's about federal aviation regulations. Each passenger must be in their assigned seat for takeoff for the purposes of the flight manifest. This is a matter of safety and security." He then addressed Jameson. "Mr. Blackwood, I sincerely apologize for this delay. We will sort this out." He turned back to Carolyn. "Ma'am, I must now ask you to please gather your belongings and move to seat 4F. If you'd like, once we are airborne, I can see if there are other arrangements we can make." It was a final, polite request. It was also an order from the flight's ranking crew member. Carolyn seemed to swell with indignation. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice rising in pitch, turning heads all the way back in premium economy. "You are harassing a paying customer on behalf of someone who clearly doesn't belong here. I want your name, and yours," she said, jabbing a finger first at David, then at Maria, who was hovering nervously in the background. "I will have both of your jobs by the time we land." Jameson watched the scene unfold with a kind of detached fascination. It was a masterclass in deflection and aggression. Carolyn was systematically trying to dismantle the authority of the crew, to intimidate them into submission. But she had miscalculated. She assumed David Chen was like Maria, easily cowed. David stood his ground. "My name is David Chen, and my colleague is Maria Sanchez. You are welcome to file any complaint you wish, ma'am. But right now you are in violation of crew instructions. You are delaying the departure of an international flight with 247 passengers on board." "I don't care about the other passengers," she declared, the last vestiges of her patrician control crumbling away. "I care about being treated with the respect I am owed. I am not moving." It was a declaration of war. She had drawn a line in the sand, not just with Jameson, but with the entire crew and the operational integrity of the flight. Jameson knew what was coming next. He had seen it in high-stakes negotiations when a cornered executive chose to blow up a deal rather than concede a point. It was the scorched earth strategy of a narcissist. David Chen's face was now grim. He took a small step back and spoke into the small phone connected to the cabin intercom system, his voice low but audible to those in the front row. "Captain Miller, this is David in the cabin. I'm in first row 1. I have a passenger who is refusing to comply with crew instructions regarding seating. We've explained the situation and the federal regulations. She is adamant and causing a significant disturbance." There was a pause. The disembodied voice of the captain, tinny and laced with authority, crackled back, audible only to David. David listened, nodded, and said, "Yes, sir, I understand. I will inform her." He hung up the small phone and looked at Carolyn Fletcher, his expression now devoid of any empathy. It was pure procedural seriousness. "Ma'am," David said, his voice echoing with the delegated authority of the captain, "you have one final opportunity to comply. Captain Miller has instructed me to inform you that if you do not immediately move to your assigned seat, you will be considered a security risk to this flight." The term security risk hung in the air, a phrase so loaded with post-9/11 gravity that it sucked the remaining oxygen out of the cabin. Passengers who had been merely annoyed were now alarmed. This was no longer about a seating squabble. This had escalated to a different stratosphere. Carolyn Fletcher, however, seemed to believe it was a bluff. A smirk played on her lips. "A security risk? Don't be absurd. For sitting in a chair, you are all being theatrical. Go tell your captain that Carolyn Fletcher is not intimidated by your little power games." She turned, picked up her phone again, and angled it towards Jameson and the crew, her finger hovering over the record button. In fact, I think I'll record this harassment for my lawyers." That was it, the final irrevocable move. David Chen simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. He took out his intercom phone again. "Captain," he said, his voice ringing with grim finality. "The passenger in 1A is refusing to comply with your final instruction." He listened for a moment. "Yes, sir," he said. "Copy that. We'll prepare the cabin." He hung up. He looked not at Carolyn, but at the other passengers in the first-class cabin, his face a mask of regretful duty. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying through the now silent cabin. "The captain has made a decision." The silence that followed David Chen's announcement was profound. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that precedes a verdict. Every passenger from the front row to the very back seemed to be holding their breath. Carolyn Fletcher still had a triumphant smirk on her face, believing she had called the crew's bluff and won. She was about to discover in the most public and humiliating way possible that she had fundamentally misunderstood the game she was playing. Jameson Blackwood remained standing in the aisle, a silent observer to the drama he had unwittingly started. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if watching a complex system reach its breaking point. He had seen it in business, a stubborn CEO refusing to adapt to market changes, a board clinging to outdated practices. The result was always the same, a spectacular, self-inflicted collapse. The forward cabin door, which had been closed in preparation for pushback, hissed open. A figure in a crisp pilot's uniform stepped through from the jet bridge, followed by the lead gate agent. The pilot was a man in his late 50s, with a salt and pepper buzz cut and a jawline that looked like it had been carved from granite. 4 gold stripes gleamed on his epaulets. This was Captain Robert Miller, and his face was a thundercloud of controlled fury. He didn't stride. He moved with the slow, deliberate economy of a man who held absolute authority in his domain. His eyes scanned the scene, David Chen standing rigidly at attention. Maria Sanchez looking like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. Jameson Blackwood, poised and unreadable. And finally, Carolyn Fletcher still seated smugly in 1A. Captain Miller ignored her completely at first. He addressed his purser. "David, report." "Captain," David began, his voice formal. "We have a passenger, Ms. Carolyn Fletcher, ticketed for seat 4F, who has occupied seat 1A. Mr. Jameson Blackwood is ticketed for 1A. We have verified both boarding passes. Ms. Fletcher has been repeatedly instructed to move to her assigned seat by myself and flight attendant Sanchez. She has refused. I relayed your direct order, and she refused that as well, stating she would not be intimidated." The captain's gaze, cold and hard, as Diamond finally settled on Carolyn. "Ma'am," he said, his voice not loud, but carrying an unmistakable command tone that cut through the cabin air. "I am Captain Miller. This is my aircraft. Under Federal Aviation Administration regulations and international law, the captain has final authority over all operations and personnel on board. I am giving you a direct lawful order. Get out of that seat and move to seat 4F, now." There was no negotiation in his voice, no room for debate. It was a raw command. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Carolyn's face. The arrival of the captain, the sheer force of his presence, was something she hadn't anticipated. But her pride, her deeply ingrained belief in her own superiority, was a fortress. To back down now in front of everyone was unthinkable. She chose to double down. "Captain," she said, attempting to adopt a reasonable peer-to-peer tone, as if they were equals discussing a minor disagreement at a country club. "I think your staff is overreacting. This is simply a seating mix-up. As a global services member, I don't care if you are the Queen of England." Captain Miller cut her off, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Your status on this airline ends where my authority begins. Your refusal to follow a crew member's safety-related instruction has now made you a security threat. You have created a public disturbance and delayed this flight. This is your final chance. Move now." He took a half step closer. The full weight of his position of the federal laws backing him of the responsibility for nearly 250 souls was concentrated in that single step. Carolyn Fletcher's face hardened, her features setting into a mask of defiant fury. She had come too far to retreat. "This is harassment," she spat. "You can't do this. I have rights." "You are correct," the captain replied, his voice chillingly calm. "You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney. But you do not have the right to be on this aircraft." He turned away from her, his dismissal absolute. He looked at the gate agent. "Helena, she's off the plane. Get Port Authority." He then raised his voice to address the entire cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a passenger's non-compliance with crew instructions, which constitutes a security breach, we are now required to return to the gate. I repeat, we are returning to the gate. I will have more information for you shortly. Cabin crew prepare for deplaning." A collective groan swept through the aircraft, a wave of disbelief and anger. People on tight connections on their way to funerals, weddings, crucial business meetings, all of them were now victims of one woman's intransigence. Carolyn Fletcher's face had gone from smug to shocked to ashen white. "Return to the gate, deplaning. You can't do that. It's a flight to Geneva." The sheer scale of the consequence was finally dawning on her. She had thought this was a battle for a chair, a small victory of will. She never imagined she could lose the entire war. "I can and I have," Captain Miller said, turning his back to her. He spoke into his radio. "Tower, this is United 972. We are returning to gate C-123. We have a Level 1 security threat on board. We will require law enforcement to meet the aircraft." The words Level 1 security threat and law enforcement ricocheted around the cabin. Phones which had been surreptitiously recording were now held up openly. A man in business class started live tweeting. The story was already escaping the confines of the fuselage and entering the digital bloodstream of the internet. Carolyn Fletcher finally unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, her face a mess of confusion and rage. "This is insane. I'll move fine. I'll move to the other seat," she cried out, a desperate last-ditch attempt to reverse the irreversible. Captain Miller paused at the cabin door and looked back at her, his expression one of utter contempt. "Ma'am," he said, and the entire plane fell silent to hear his final verdict. "The moment you refused a captain's direct order, your ticket was voided. Your chance to move has passed. You are no longer a passenger. You are now trespassing on a federal conveyance. The Port Authority police will explain the rest to you." He stepped out, and the jet bridge door sealed behind him with a pneumatic hiss as final as a tomb. The tipping point had been passed. The flight was grounded. And for Carolyn Fletcher, the freefall had just begun. The mood inside the Dreamliner transformed instantly. The low hum of the engines spooled down into an eerie silence, broken only by the anxious murmurs of the 247 other passengers. The blue mood lighting designed to soothe now seemed to cast a cold, clinical pall over the cabin. Every passenger was now a hostage to one woman's ego. Carolyn Fletcher stood in the aisle, frozen. The color had drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The armor of her entitlement had been shattered, and she was left exposed and utterly powerless. The other first-class passengers, who had previously tried to remain invisible, now stared at her with open hostility. "Are you happy now?" A man in 2D, dressed in the unmistakable uniform of a Swiss banker, hissed at her. "Some of us have million-dollar deals to close." "My daughter is getting married tomorrow," a woman from row 3 cried out, her voice thick with emotion. Carolyn didn't respond. She looked at Jameson Blackwood, who had calmly taken a step back to lean against the bulkhead, his briefcase at his feet. She seemed to be searching his face for something, triumph, smugness, anything to confirm her narrative that this was his fault. She found nothing. His expression was one of weary resignation, the look of a man who had seen the inevitable play out exactly as predicted. His lack of reaction seemed to infuriate her more than any overt gloating could have. The plane, which had pushed back a few feet from the gate, was slowly towed back into position. The gentle bump as it reconnected with the jet bridge sounded like a gavel falling. The main cabin door was unsealed, and the harsh, unfiltered light of the terminal flooded in, dispelling the curated ambience of the aircraft. 3 figures appeared in the doorway. They were not airline employees. They were officers of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Police Department. They were large, impassive men in dark blue uniforms, their belts heavy with equipment. Their presence instantly escalated the situation from a corporate drama to a criminal matter. One of the officers, a sergeant with a thick mustache and tired eyes, stepped inside his gaze, immediately finding Carolyn. The gate agent pointed a discreet finger. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice polite but firm, carrying the easy authority of someone who deals with chaos for a living. "I'm Sergeant O'Malley with the Port Authority Police. We've been asked to escort you off the aircraft." "Escort me?" Carolyn's voice was a high-pitched squeak. "I haven't done anything wrong. I was just sitting." "Captain's discretion, ma'am," the officer said patiently. "Interfering with the duties of a flight crew is a federal offense. We can discuss it in the terminal. Please come with us now, quietly." "Quietly? You want me to go quietly after being humiliated like this?" She turned her eyes wild, scanning the cabin full of accusing faces and recording phones. Her lifetime of privilege had taught her that the best defense was a loud, indignant offense. "This is an outrage! It's because of him!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Jameson. "He orchestrated this. He wanted my seat, and he made them do this to me." The accusation was so baseless, so desperate, that it drew a few gasps. Jameson didn't even flinch. He simply met her gaze, his silence a more powerful rebuttal than any words could have been. Sergeant O'Malley sighed. He'd seen this 1,000 times. "Ma'am, let's go. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." When she didn't move, still sputtering about her lawyers and her rights, the second officer stepped forward. "Ma'am, you are now delaying a federal investigation. You can either walk off this plane on your own 2 feet, or we can assist you." The word assist was heavy with implication. It meant handcuffs. It meant being physically removed. The final unthinkable humiliation. That threat finally broke through her wall of defiance. Her shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her. With a look of pure, venomous hatred directed at Jameson, she snatched her Louis Vuitton bag from the neighboring seat. As she turned, her movements clumsy with rage and embarrassment, she knocked her smaller carry-on tote bag off the seat. It fell to the floor with a loud thud, and a heavy, ornate silver picture frame slid out, its glass shattering on the cabin floor. In the frame was a faded photograph of a stern-looking man standing in front of a factory building. She bent to retrieve it, her hands shaking. But Sergeant O'Malley was faster. "Leave it, ma'am. We'll collect your belongings." Flanked by the two officers, Carolyn Fletcher, the woman who always sat in 1A, was walked down the aisle. It was a walk of shame of epic proportions. The gazes of 247 people followed her every step. The lenses of dozens of smartphones documented her downfall. Her face, once a mask of haughty condescension, was now blotchy and tear-streaked. As she passed through the economy cabin, someone shouted, "Good riddance!" and a small scattered applause broke out. The moment she was off the plane, a new announcement came over the PA system, this time from the first officer. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Captain Miller and the entire crew, I want to extend our sincerest apologies for this disruption. Unfortunately, due to FAA security protocols, when a passenger is involuntarily deplaned under these circumstances, we are required to conduct a full security sweep of the aircraft. This means all passengers must deplane and take all of their carry-on items with them. We will also need to screen all checked baggage again. At this time, this flight is officially grounded. We have no estimate for a new departure time. Please exit the aircraft in an orderly fashion. United agents at the gate will have information about rebooking." A wave of collective agony washed over the plane. Grounded. Not just delayed, but grounded indefinitely. The announcement was the final nail in the coffin of everyone's travel plans. As people began to stand and retrieve their bags, a strange thing happened. Several passengers, as they passed Jameson Blackwood, who was still waiting patiently by the bulkhead, stopped to speak to him. "Sir, I saw the whole thing." "You handled that with incredible class," said the Swiss banker. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," said the mother of the bride, her own travel woes momentarily forgotten. David Chen. The purser approached him, his face etched with professional regret. "Mr. Blackwood, on behalf of United Airlines, I am profoundly sorry for what you just experienced. This is not the standard of service we aim for." Jameson gave a slight nod. "You and your crew handled a difficult situation by the book, David. Thank you." His simple, sincere validation seemed to mean the world to the purser. As Jameson finally picked up his briefcase to join the slow-moving queue of deplaning passengers, he was no longer just the man whose seat was stolen. He was the man who had weathered an ugly storm with unshakable dignity, earning the quiet respect of everyone who had witnessed it. The flight was grounded, his own crucial schedule thrown into chaos, but in the court of public opinion within that metal tube, he had unequivocally won. The gate area for Flight 972 had devolved into organized chaos. A long, snaking line of frustrated passengers had formed at the customer service desk, their voices a symphony of complaint and anxiety. United gate agents, their faces strained, worked furiously to rebook travelers onto flights that were already oversold. The flight to Geneva was officially cancelled. The next available direct flight wasn't for another 24 hours. Jameson Blackwood bypassed the queue. As a Premier 1K and Global Services member himself, a fact he never felt the need to announce, he had a dedicated number. He found a quiet corner, pulled out his phone, and made a call. Within 5 minutes, his personal travel concierge at the airline had him rebooked in first class on a Lufthansa flight to Frankfurt, leaving in 3 hours with a connecting flight that would still get him to Geneva in time for his afternoon meetings, albeit cutting it close for the keynote speech rehearsal. He was accustomed to solving problems, not dwelling on them. As he was confirming the details, he overheard snippets of conversation from the distraught passengers around him. The most important pitch of my career completely gone. My brother's wedding, I'm the best man. Non-refundable hotel booking in the Alps. He felt a pang of empathy. These were the real victims of Carolyn Fletcher's arrogance. A young woman was sobbing quietly into her phone, explaining to her parents that she was going to miss her grandfather's 80th birthday party. Her story touched a nerve. On a quiet impulse, Jameson walked over to her. "Excuse me," he said gently. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you trying to get to Switzerland?" The young woman, a student named Chloe, looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Yes, to Zurich. Everything is booked. I can't afford a new last-minute ticket on another airline." Jameson nodded. He took out his phone again. "What's your name?" he asked. A few taps, a conversation with his concierge, and a transfer of a significant number of his own frequent flyer miles later, he turned back to her. "Chloe, there is one seat left in business class on a Swiss air flight to Zurich, leaving in 2 hours from Terminal B. It's yours. The confirmation is being sent to your email right now." Chloe stared at him dumbfounded. "What? No, I can't accept that." "Why would you do that? Let's just call it a compensation for our shared inconvenience," Jameson said with a small smile. "Have a wonderful time at your grandfather's birthday." He gave a slight nod and walked away before she could protest further, leaving the young woman staring at her phone in stunned, grateful silence. It was a small gesture, but it was who he was. He built things up. He didn't tear them down. Meanwhile, in a sterile, windowless room deep within the terminal, Carolyn Fletcher was discovering the true cost of her actions. 2 Port Authority officers and a stern-faced representative from the airline's corporate security team sat across a metal table from her. The bravado she had displayed on the plane was gone, replaced by a creeping dread. "Let's be very clear about your situation, Ms. Fletcher," the airline security official, a man named Henderson, said coldly. "By refusing to comply with the lawful orders of the captain and crew, you interfered with the duties of a flight crew, which is a violation of the U.S. Code, Title 49, Section 464. That is a federal felony." Carolyn's jaw dropped. "A felony? For a seat, for interfering with the crew," Henderson corrected her. "The seat was merely the catalyst. Your actions were deemed a security threat, forcing the captain to ground the flight and deplane all passengers. The cost of that action, the fuel, the gate fees, the passenger compensation, the crew overtime, will run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. The airline will be seeking full restitution." Sergeant O'Malley slid a form across the table. "You're being issued a summons for interfering with public transportation and disorderly conduct under state law. We are also forwarding our report to the FBI and the FAA, who may choose to pursue federal charges. The FAA will almost certainly levy a civil penalty, which can be upwards of $35,000. Her world was spinning. "But I'm a global services member. I'm a valued customer." She pleaded the words, sounding hollow even to her own ears. Henderson gave a humorless laugh. "Ma'am, you were a valued customer. As of 1 hour ago, your global services status has been revoked. You are permanently banned from flying on United Airlines and all of our Star Alliance partner airlines. For life." Banned for life. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her entire lifestyle, built around effortless international travel, had just been decimated. "Now," Henderson continued, "we have the matter of your statements. You made a number of, let's call them racially charged remarks that were overheard by multiple passengers and crew members. You also publicly and falsely accused a fellow passenger of orchestrating your removal. Given that dozens of people were recording this incident, your conduct is now a matter of public record. I would advise you to find a very good lawyer, Miss Fletcher. You are going to need one. Carolyn Fletcher finally broke. The pearls around her neck seemed to be choking her. Sobs racked her body, not of remorse, but of pure, unadulterated self-pity. She had flown too close to the sun on wings of privilege, and they had just melted away, sending her plummeting back to a hard, unforgiving reality. As she was processed and released with a summons to appear in court, her phone began to buzz incessantly. A friend had sent her a link. It was a Twitter thread posted by the business-class passenger who had been live tweeting. It had gone viral. It included a shaky video of her confrontation with the captain, her face contorted in a mask of ugly entitlement. The comments were a tidal wave of digital vitriol. Her name, Carolyn Fletcher, was trending, and someone had already done some digging. One reply stood out, sending a fresh spike of ice-cold fear through her veins. Wait. Carolyn Fletcher. As in Fletcher. Manufacturing in Pennsylvania. Aren't they the ones desperately trying to land that big EV battery casing contract with Stellaron Corp in Europe? Man, this is not a good look. Her blood ran cold. The Geneva trip wasn't a vacation. It was the most important business trip of her life. Fletcher. Manufacturing the company her grandfather had built and her father had expanded was on the verge of bankruptcy. This deal with Stellaron Corp was their last hope, their only lifeline. Her meeting, the one she had spent 6 months preparing for, was in 2 days, and she had just gotten herself banned from nearly every major airline that could get her there. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in consequence for Carolyn Fletcher. Her name and face were everywhere. The viral video was picked up by news outlets, first online, then on cable news. She was the new face of airborne entitlement, a meme, a cautionary tale. She was Gate Rage Karen, Passenger Patty, first-class felon. Her carefully constructed world of manicured respectability had been torched by a fire of her own making. She managed to book a prohibitively expensive multi-leg flight on a non-aligned budget airline that would get her to Geneva through a series of humiliating stopovers in Iceland and Poland. She traveled in a hoodie and sunglasses, but her face was now too infamous. She was recognized, pointed at, whispered about. The journey was a 26-hour crucible of shame. She landed in Geneva exhausted and frayed just hours before her critical meeting at Stellaron Corp's headquarters. She checked into her hotel, her hands trembling as she tried to put on a brave face to somehow salvage the deal that could save her family's company. As she was steaming her suit, an email pinged on her phone. The subject line made her heart stop. Subject: Cancellation of our meeting. Fletcher. Manufacturing. Stellaron Corp. It was from Mr. Dubois, the head of procurement at Stellaron. The message was brief and brutally professional. Ms. Fletcher. In light of recent events that have come to our attention regarding your conduct on a flight from New York, we are no longer confident that Fletcher Manufacturing aligns with the core values of corporate responsibility and personal integrity that Stellaron Corp upholds. We see no productive path forward for a partnership at this time. Therefore, we are cancelling our scheduled meeting. The request for proposal is officially closed to you. Sincerely, Pierre Dubois, Head of Procurement, Stellaron Corp. Carolyn dropped her phone. It clattered to the floor. The words swam before her eyes. Does not align with our core values. Her personal behavior, her single act of bigoted arrogance, had been judged as a direct reflection of her entire company. She hadn't just lost a seat or a flight or her dignity. She had just single-handedly hammered the final nail into the coffin of Fletcher Manufacturing. The company her grandfather built was gone, destroyed by her own prejudice. Meanwhile, on the other side of Geneva, Jameson Blackwood was standing on the main stage of the World Economic Forum, bathed in the warm glow of the stage lights. His rescheduled travel had been seamless. He'd arrived, met with his team, and was now preparing to deliver the keynote address that would launch his Helios Array project onto the world stage. Backstage, his COO, a sharp woman named Sarah Jenkins, handed him a bottle of water and a tablet. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice a mix of awe and disbelief. She showed him a news alert on the screen. Stellaron Corp acquisition finalized by US tech giant Etheria Dynamics. The news had just broken. The secret back-channel deal was now public. Jameson smiled. "Looks like our timing was perfect." "That's not the half of it," Sarah said, scrolling down the article. "You know that woman on the plane, the one who caused all the drama, Carolyn Fletcher?" "The name sounds familiar," Jameson said dryly. Her company, Fletcher Manufacturing, was one of the finalists for a major supply contract with Stellaron. A real make-or-break deal for them. Stellaron's procurement team just cancelled their final meeting this morning, citing a misalignment of corporate values after her little stunt went viral. Sarah shook her head in amazement. She had no idea. She was flying to Geneva to beg for a contract from a company you were in the process of buying. She disrespected, insulted, and tried to humiliate the very man who was about to become the ultimate owner of her potential client. The sheer cosmic irony of it was staggering. It wasn't just karma. It was karma of a biblical, almost Shakespearean scale. In trying to put a black man in his place, she had ensured that she would have no place left to stand in the business world. Her prejudice had blinded her to the fact that the man she saw as beneath her was in fact standing on the very summit she was desperately trying to climb. Jameson looked at the news story, then out at the waiting audience. He felt no joy in her ruin, only a profound sense of sadness at the destructive power of hatred. His success was not a weapon to be used against others, but a tool to build a better world. He had built Etheria Dynamics on principles of innovation, efficiency, and respect. Carolyn Fletcher had run her legacy into the ground on principles of entitlement, bigotry, and arrogance. He straightened his tie. The announcer's voice boomed through the auditorium. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, a man whose work is powering the future of our planet. Please welcome the founder and CEO of Etheria Dynamics, Mr. Jameson Blackwood." As he walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, the contrast could not have been more stark. One person's journey had ended in a dark, empty hotel room in a city of strangers, their legacy in ashes. The other's was just beginning on a brightly lit stage, with the whole world watching, ready to listen. The entire flight had been grounded, but only one of them had truly been brought down to earth. A week later, the dust had settled, but the crater left by Carolyn Fletcher's implosion was still smoking. The news cycle had moved on, but for the individuals involved, the consequences were permanent. Fletcher Manufacturing, unable to secure the Stellaron contract or any other lifeline, officially filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. It wasn't a restructuring, it was a liquidation. The factory her grandfather had founded a source of employment in its Pennsylvania town for over 80 years would be shuttered. Hundreds of people would lose their jobs. The local papers wrote obituaries for the company, citing insurmountable market pressures. But those who knew the full story understood the real cause of death was a terminal case of hubris administered by its own heir. Carolyn Fletcher returned to the United States, not as a respected businesswoman, but as a pariah. She faced a mountain of legal bills, a pending federal investigation, and the silent accusing stares of a community whose economic heart she had helped stop. The fortune she had inherited was gone, swallowed by lawsuits and the collapse of her company. Her name was no longer a key that opened doors, but a brand associated with public disgrace. The pearls and St. John suits were sold off. The grand house was put on the market. Her punishment was not a fine or a brief stint in jail. It was the complete and utter erasure of the privileged world she had believed was her birthright. For Jameson Blackwood, life moved forward with purpose. The acquisition of Stellar & Corp was a massive success for Etheria Dynamics, positioning them as the undisputed global leader in green energy. His keynote speech was widely praised, leading to new government partnerships and philanthropic funding for the Helios Array project. He was in his office overlooking the Manhattan skyline when his COO Sarah walked in. The final report from United's corporate security came in, a follow-up on the Flight 972 incident, she said, placing a file on his desk. Jameson opened it. It detailed the full financial and legal fallout for Carolyn Fletcher. It also contained formal commendations for Captain Miller and Purser David Chen for their professionalism and adherence to security protocols. There was a personal handwritten note from the CEO of United Airlines to Jameson, apologizing once more and thanking him for his remarkable composure, which they noted had prevented an already tense situation from escalating even further. The airline also made a significant donation to one of Etheria's charitable foundations as a gesture of goodwill. "Did you see the last part?" Sarah asked. "About the other passengers." Jameson flipped the page. The report noted an unusual number of positive customer feedback reports from the cancelled flight. Passengers had specifically praised the crew's handling of the incident, but they also mentioned the unbelievable kindness of a fellow passenger. The airline's internal investigation had connected the dots. Chloe, the student who had made it to her grandfather's birthday, had written a glowing letter. So had the Swiss banker, who noted Jameson's grace under pressure. In the midst of chaos, his character had shone through. Jameson closed the file. He felt no victory, only a quiet affirmation of his core belief in the long run the universe bends towards balance. Arrogance is an unsustainable energy source. It burns hot and fast, but ultimately consumes itself. Respect, integrity, and kindness. Those were the true renewable energies of the human spirit. He looked out the window at the sprawling city below. He thought about the woman who saw him only as a stereotype, a person to be put in the back of the plane. She could never have imagined that his work involved moving the entire world forward. She was so focused on his skin color that she failed to see the content of his character and the power of his vision. In the end, the grounding of Flight 972 was more than just a travel disruption. It was a morality play performed at 30,000 feet. It was a stark lesson that in our interconnected world, the person you dismiss today might be the person who holds the keys to your entire future tomorrow. It wasn't about a white passenger and a black CEO. It was about two competing philosophies of life. One built on exclusion and entitlement, the other on inclusion and merit. And in the end, there was never any doubt which one was built to last. And there you have it. The incredible story of how one woman's prejudice didn't just delay a flight, it detonated a karma bomb that vaporized her entire life's work and legacy. It's a powerful reminder that the character we show in small moments can have consequences of an unimaginable scale. Jameson Blackwood didn't need to raise his voice or fight back with anger. His success, his dignity, and his quiet adherence to principle were his ultimate weapons. Carolyn Fletcher, in her attempt to assert her superiority, revealed nothing but her own profound insecurity, and in doing so, engineered her own spectacular downfall. What do you think? Was this the ultimate case of karma? What would you have done in this situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs to see that in the end, respect is non-negotiable. And most importantly, if you want more true stories of drama justice and real-life consequences, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we have coming next. Thanks for watching.